Hi, hello everyone. My name is Armagan, and today on Founders Grit, we have uh, we have Eric. Hi, Eric.
Hi.
Thank you for coming. So Eric could be called somewhat of a Don Draper personality from Mad Men if you've watched it, or you could see him as Jordan Belfort from Wall Street. But today we have Eric, and who's going to explain to us in demystify whether he identifies with all these personalities or not. Hi, Eric. Please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I'm quite as good looking as Don Draper, but my career has been defined basically by the disciplines that I have focused on, and it's really been taking data and analytics and using models to derive insights, and sometimes that has led me to apply it. I was on Wall Street for 16 years, and I applied it for writing derivative models and ultimately, trading derivatives. And then after that, I, was a bit more focused on helping marketers how to effectively market on television and the internet. And it was again taking data, applying models and analytics to help optimize outcomes. And basically, that's most of my career spanned that. I have a diverse experience set. I have a venture fund, Peak Opportunity Partners. So I've done venture investing. I've had businesses that I've started and exited, and I'm currently engaged with my latest initiative, which is MutualMarkets. So I'm super excited about that opportunity.
Interesting. So I have two questions. First, being you talked about Wall Street finance and marketing. Could you tell our viewers why these two industries were the first ones, or like what do you think is the reason these two industries took on data analytics way before any other industry?
I think that I guess I would say motivation and uh, the ability to find the metrics, the ability, and then a focus on measurement. I mean, now the whole world is focused on
Hmm.
measurement. But, in terms of trying to understand value on Wall Street, relative measures and KPIs were sort of part of the DNA from the very
Hmm.
beginning in understanding stock valuation, bond valuations, and I think marketing, particularly with the onset of the digital age, the ability to just do tracking and measurement was profoundly increased. And so I think with the advent of the internet, quite honestly, and then internet advertising, which followed, the ability to track and then create measurement and analytics actually drove that development. And then what happened is linear television and other parts that were non-digital quickly learned that they were missing a lot of the measurement opportunity and hence the ability to gain insights that the digital side was experiencing, and it led to a revolution across all of marketing.
Yeah, 100%. So with this new project which you're working on, you said mutual markets, right? Could you tell our viewers a bit more about what mutual markets is all about?
Sure. MutualMarkets is we're developing a marketplace for co-marketing partnerships. So it's a place where we will see brands and content or IP holders finding a place to partner. So an example of one might be there was a campaign a few years back with Starbucks partnering with Spotify when Starbucks had
Yes, I
originally,
remember.
and so that would be an example of a co-marketing opportunity, and we're building a marketplace that helps enable that.
Okay, so what's the biggest challenge that you're facing currently in building such a marketplace?
I mean, really, I think the biggest challenge I think most companies have and is hiring the right people. It's like building teams effectively and and managing them effectively, and is always both the biggest challenge and also the greatest opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
If you hire great people, your businesses will always have a tailwind behind them, and so I always like to think that a CEO being chief talent officer is one of your primary objectives.
Okay. If I'm not wrong, we were hit with a global pandemic a year back. How has that changed the landscape for your industry and mutual markets? Has it increased the number of clients you guys are looking at, or is
Well,
it hard to
so
find talent? Yeah.
yeah, so MutualMarkets we're at the early stage. We launched in January. We announced our funding in February. So for us, it's very early stages.
Okay.
But I've sit on boards of companies. I also had worked very intensely with a company I was on the board of, but I also was operating in Denver called Go Spot Check. And so I would say that I've had a couple of sets of experiences during COVID. So one, I was operating a well-established venture-backed business in Denver during the start of COVID, and we experienced basically all of the decisions that companies faced at that time, which was decisioning about what the effect it's going to have on projecting forward on what it's going to mean for revenue, what it's going to mean then for managing expenses, what the impact is going to be on all of the employees, and figuring out plans to navigate it. And those were definitely challenging times. The interesting thing for me was, in the context of thinking about remote work and its impact, I actually had a very interesting experience in terms of being able to compare pre-COVID and post-COVID, because I was living half of the time in the Northeast and then half of the time in Denver, and I was working directly on with teams on a day in day out basis.
I get it.
Prior to COVID, half the month in a remote setting. So, being on a Zoom call where you might be the only person on Zoom and the rest of the team is in a Zoom enabled conference. And I experienced that half the month and then half the time being there. And then, post COVID, the world changed where everyone was remote. So now when meetings were occurring, everyone is interacting in using teleconferencing. And the interesting thing for me personally, in having been in both, is that one, I was already prepared to be fully remote because I already had a fully remote office set up so that it was easy for me to work in a remote capacity. Yeah. And separately though, the experience once everyone went on Zoom, it was a far superior experience for me. That's not comparing
It's interesting.
Because once everyone was on this sort of a level playing field in terms of communication, I went from missing, some of the nuance and some of the dialogue that happens to all of a sudden everyone having, to always having a complete picture and not feeling that sense of disconnect. And
I get it.
The other aspect was when you have one or two people remote and the rest of the people in a room, people talk in the natural discourse in a meeting, people talk over each other. And so it becomes very difficult at times to follow. And it also becomes there's always that tech challenge, like of the connection, did they connect in? Did they forget to connect in? There's all of these things that make the experience far less. And so it's been super interesting to see, for me, having experienced both in person in a hybrid mode to all of a sudden fully remote, to really see that difference. And honestly, for me, the experience of fully remote was actually significantly better.
Oh, okay. So you talk about the experience being way better for you, but I wanted to know a bit more about the colleagues that you worked with. How did they respond to everything going remote versus just having you remote? How was your team's dynamic and perspective?
Yes, that's a great question. I think there's no singular answer to it. I think that
Mhm.
it's definitely a function of what your home environment is like to understand
Mhm.
whether or not it was a positive or negative. I think universally, I would say that most of my colleagues were appreciative of getting the time back from commuting. So
Yeah,
I think that was generally that efficiency was a positive. On the other hand, depending on COVID is sort of uh, created additional challenges for anyone who had whether you had a young child or you had a school age child.
yeah.
Dealing with that balance of trying to be able to do dedicated work at the same time your children were
Being a
home.
parent, yeah.
Being a parent, that created for some people quite a challenge, and so you had a cult that was definitely a challenge for us. We created policies which made it very very clear that we understood where our it was where our employees priorities should be, and your family's super important, and that was to come first, and therefore to create a culture of acceptance of some flexibility in terms of what is expected of team members. And I think everyone understood that, and I think it still that flexibility was embraced throughout by everybody, and it helped, but it didn't that definitely caused stress, and I think it still does for people who have for those people who have particularly when they have young age, school age or under school age children
Hmm.
that they're trying to balance.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes 100%. So you mentioned something about the experience being more positive once everybody went remote. So there is no talking over each other. You make sure that everybody's listened to, everybody's remotely working. So the level of communication is the same for everyone, rather than different for people who are together and different from someone who's worked remotely. But now, my question is, when restrictions are lifted off, when things are gonna go back to normal, we already see vaccines being rolled out. Would you, or would your company or your employees, would you want to go back to a mixed hybrid situation where you are again working remotely and your colleagues are not? Would you think that's an optimum situation, or would you want to somehow maintain the remote work setting where everyone works remotely?
Yeah. So again, it's a great question. So let's just talk about what the advantages of remote work are.
Sure.
First, it gives you a much greater pool of talent to access now. So if a company was focused primarily on a given location, you could you've got somewhat limits of like between like 60-mile radius if you're
Yeah.
demanding in-person type of work environment. But
Yeah.
all of a sudden the entire world becomes available to you if you're willing to accept remote, and so that's a huge advantage. And in a company like MutualMarkets, which is in its early stages, it's certainly a huge opportunity in terms of cost
Hmm.
savings to say that one, I can access talent everywhere, which actually does provide better economics as well as better talent. And two, I don't have to necessarily have a large office space or even any office space to start. And so I think that it's a very very advantageous time to be in a launch stage of a company. So we see that as an advantage. And in a post-COVID world, the other advantage is that more and more people have become accustomed, obviously, to working and how to work and how to set up their life to be able to work in a remote setting. So, in a way, the challenge of this pandemic and what it's done to the workforce has created this opportunity in the sense that we've been acculturated, for lack of a better word, to the idea of operating in a remote capacity and how to do it effectively. Now,
Hmm.
that said, like Zoom
Yeah.
meetings have their own set of issues and challenges on a continual basis as well, and not everyone is set up and will be set up so that they can effectively work, at home. And so the way we see things playing out for us is that you will be in a hybrid environment where there'll be, but the how you conceive of what that workspace will look like will be different. So, much more of think of it as, you have a work environment that you can opt into, that on any given day that has, a certain amount of space, but you don't have fixed desks. You don't, you have more of a bullpen of available places for which you could work, with workstations that are that are set
Hmm.
up. You plug your laptop in and you're good to go. So I think it's we think of it it will be a hybrid type of environment as you described it eventually. For us, the first phase of this is you know is going it will be in a remote capacity.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. So let's wrap up the podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about mutual markets or yourself?
Well, let me ask you a question. When you talk about your listeners, who are your listeners?
Sure, sure. So our listeners are graduate students, they're co-workers, they're startup founders, and employees of startups themselves. So it's a community of entrepreneurs and the people who work along with entrepreneurs.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think the biggest challenge, I think, which we all have to be cognizant of, uh, in particularly in early stage companies in a remote world, is building culture is a challenge,
Mhm.
and I think that that's something that you have to focus on, particularly if you're starting from a remote in a remote world, and then coming up with strategies for how you're going to build a culture when you're not actually physically getting together in some of those type of the normal type of events that you would be running if you were physically in the same space. So I think that that's something that we are continually challenged to think about as we grow, uh, and we will strategize over. And the second thing is recognizing, that maybe Zoom itself, we recognize that Zoom itself can be challenging, and it has to be a tool that is used judiciously, in terms of, you can't, giving people back-to-back Zoom meetings. There is, Zoom meetings are real fatigue. Seeing there, it's been studies done that show, like, just, or surveys done, there's stress related to just seeing yourself in a video over and over again, which is a new experience, I think, for everyone. And
Absolutely.
it's an interesting environment because, which there was a survey done, which I forgot the source of, but we talked about the eye contact. It's super intense from an eye contact perspective because you see everyone directly. So it's like this super intense communication of, sort of
Yes.
eye contact, whereas normally, in a normal conference room or setting, you as the speaker, your eyes can drift, and
Yeah.
that's all sort of normal human behavior. And Zoom challenges that as well. So I think, if there was a study done, a long time ago, which about, how long people have the ability to stay concentrated and focused, and it's around 20 minutes. And interestingly
Mhm.
enough, that's why the original TED Talks were all 20 minutes long, and still are
Oh,
the original. And that was because that is the attention span, and of the people's ability to stay focused. And I think if you recognize that and realize that you shouldn't be, running Zoom meetings that last an hour and a half, I think that
Oh yeah, makes sense. 100% true.
you're on the right track.
Plus, I remember another. So before COVID hit and Zoom conferences became a thing which would be ubiquitous, I remember my supervisor once telling me that a, a great way to make sure that you're making your meetings hit all the goals is remove the chairs from a room. By removing chairs from a room, what's happening is you're not lounging, you're not sitting down or going into a passive mode. You're still active, what do you call, circling around a table, which leads to people getting to the point quicker rather than prolonging meetings.
Right. Well, that's what you're describing. What we call. That's why the term stand-ups was.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
that one. So stand-ups are meant, as a ceremony, are meant to be done standing up because you're not supposed to. First of all, they're supposed to be short and brief,
Yep.
and that's and hence the term stand-ups and
Hence the term. Yeah, exactly. Perfect then. Thank you so much for your time, Eric. Everybody, this was Eric from MutualMarkets. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. It's fun chatting with you.
Yeah, you too.